only 5% of methane is from a cow's rear end. The other 95% comes out of its mouth and nose. Reducing this source of greenhouse gas would be a major breakthrough.
One of the holy grails of people working in this area is to try to find a so-called green antibiotic, a plant bioactive compound that has antimicrobial action. In other words, it specifically targets the bugs that produce methane.
A methane inhibiting treatment is only a partial solution. A much better way to reduce methane gases would be for everyone to give up meat. But as that's unlikely to happen, other ways to reduce livestock emissions are being developed. At the University of Western Australia in Perth, a strange creation is slowly growing in a lab. Oren Katz works in the Biological Sciences department. He's making some of the world's first artificial meat.
When we grow those cells, we actually tend to refer to them, we coin the term semi-living, because they're not fully alive, they're not an animal, but they are a living part of an animal sustained in an artificial environment.
This artificial meat was grown from the muscle cells of a lamb, but they could have been cells from any animal. They were cultured in a nutrient solution made up of blood plasma derived from cattle. The muscle cell cultures are grown in a microgravity bioreactor, which constantly rotates the meat so it grows in 3 dimensions. Without this motion, the meat would be flat, only a few cells thick. Oren is currently looking at ways of giving the meat more texture in order to mimic the real thing.
There is research which is being taken place at the moment in trying to find ways in which you can exercise those muscle cells so they would align and have a more of a muscle-like texture. And there's 2 ways that can be done. One is by electrically stimulating those cells, or the second way is to try and exercise them physically, trying to build tiny exercise machines, tiny gyms for those cells to grow and become more like muscle.
Oren has brought his unique piece of engineered meat to the UK, to one of the world's great chefs. With 3 Michelin stars, Heston Blumenthal is famous for fusing science and gastronomy. This meat is so cutting edge that in Britain it's not recognised as food and so can't legally be eaten.
It's got a smell of raw liver to it.
I never really sniffed it, but
I'm not allowed to eat it, so that's about as close as I can get. You're going to turn it into the world's most expensive, tiniest hamburger.
Yes, which it is at the moment, and that's as big as one can get at this stage.
Many people may find the notion of lab-grown meat less than appetising, but not this master chef.
I think as a catalyst for conversation, debate and thought, it's fantastic, because how many people are quite happy to eat sliced ham that actually is not ham at all, it's processed meat from animals that have been literally chained to the floor.
Yeah.
That's not a problem, but something that's been grown
in a lab
actually is a problem. To me, that has the potential to be a lot more ethical.
This technology is still in its infancy. Even when scientists figure out how to increase production, this lab-grown substance would only work as ground or mincemeat. Engineered steaks and chicken breasts are only in the dream stage. And none of it is economically viable to produce yet. Artificial meat may be decades away, but there is another revolutionary technology that also mimics nature, which could be ready in a few years. And it could actually reduce existing levels of carbon dioxide, vital in a 2-degree warmer world. It's an idea inspired by the world's forests. Trees absorb carbon dioxide through photosynthesis. They play a critical role in controlling the planet's climate. So wouldn't large-scale reforestation offset global warming? It could, but there's a problem. We're running out of land. Forests are actually being chopped down or burned and turned into agricultural land at a rate of 356 square kilometres per day. But science may just have come up with an alternative.
What we call artificial trees are technologies for doing what trees do in respect to carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Namely, they pull the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and put it in a form that will stay out of the atmosphere so that you don't get the warming effect of the CO2.
While renewable energies and technologies like carbon capture and storage focus on stopping the further release of CO2, artificial trees could actually reduce the amount that's already in the air. Two men may have just made a breakthrough in this scientific quest. Theoretical physicist Klaus Lackner and engineer Alan Wright. They first met here at Biosphere 2 in Arizona. Biosphere 2 was the largest completely airtight artificial ecosystem ever built. The perfect place to study how changes in carbon dioxide would affect the planet. When Alan and Klaus began working on how to make a viable synthetic tree, they knew it would be a massive step in the fight against rising CO2 levels and global warming. The first device they built used sodium hydroxide, a chemical known for its ability to absorb carbon dioxide, but they immediately ran into problems.
The sodium hydroxide solution is a very nasty material to work with. It's very corrosive and caustic. As a potential technology candidate, it just didn't work.
So they went back to work and built this.
The breakthrough on the second device was that we abandoned liquid sodium hydroxide solutions as the way of collecting the carbon dioxide. Instead, we found a plastic which was able to collect the carbon dioxide directly when it's dry. It would pick up the CO2 just as fast as the sodium hydroxide.
This magic plastic has long been manufactured for its use in water softeners, but nobody had thought to use it for its natural ability to absorb carbon dioxide. The new prototype, more like a tall cabinet than a tree, was hung with sheets of the plastic. But for the plastic to be reusable, which is to say economically viable, they needed to find a way to make it give up the captured CO2. Another chemical, sodium carbonate, had properties that could wash the CO2 out of the plastic. But then the CO2 had to be extracted from the sodium carbonate solution, a process that required a lot of electricity.
If you were to use the electrochemical device as the way of recovering the CO2, and you would use a coal plant to make the electricity you use, you just barely break even with this device. So it was counterproductive to push into this direction. Frustrated,
Klaus and Alan decided to take a different approach to see if they could simplify the process. They went back to basics, using nothing more complicated than an airtight bell jar hooked up to a carbon dioxide monitor. Inside, strands of the special plastic.
What you see in this bell jar is a little chimney where we blow air through, and on top of it is this plastic material. So this is what is sitting on top of this little tower, and we are observing how it absorbs the CO2.
As they knew it would, the plastic immediately started absorbing carbon dioxide, reducing the amount in the bell jar. Then they did something they'd never previously considered. They dunked the plastic not in a chemical solution, but in plain water.
So I put this back on the little tower. Lock down the bell so the air cannot escape from there.
What happened next was extraordinary. the plastic released the absorbed CO2. Carbon dioxide levels inside the resealed bell jar started to rise from 388 parts per million, the level in today's air, to 540, 730, and finally 1100 parts per million.
We realized that this material, this plastic you see here, actually absorbs the CO2 when it's dry and releases it again when it's wet. So what it really takes is just water. You don't have to wash it with sodium carbonate. You can simply expose it to water.
It's one of those moments of discovery that once you understand what's going on and you realize the implications of the discovery, it's an astounding moment.
Having ensured that rainfall will not release the CO2, Alan and Klaus are building a full-scale artificial tree. When finished, it will have a central drum containing panels of the special plastic and a humidity control system. By altering the moisture levels, the artificial tree will first absorb and then release the CO2 for permanent storage. The process requires no chemicals, only a small amount of energy and a water supply.
The vision of the future for these kind of artificial trees is that they can capture the carbon dioxide nobody else can capture. That's their advantage, that is their strength.
A single tree will absorb about 1 ton of carbon dioxide a day, about 75 cars worth. 60 million of them could potentially absorb all the CO2 we currently emit. And that's not all.
This is one of the few options available to actually go back and reduce the carbon dioxide level in the atmosphere from the level we are already at or will be in 50 years from now, back down to where it is safe.
All this absorbed carbon dioxide would of course need to be put somewhere. But that's where other new technologies come in, like the geological storage of CO2 that's being tested in Utah. And because carbon dioxide levels are the same everywhere around the planet, forests of artificial trees can be planted right on top of the storage sites. Scientific breakthroughs like artificial trees and advances in renewable energy could help halt man-made climate change, even reverse it. But if measures like these are not adopted and our emissions continue to rise, climate scientists warn that this century we could reach 3 degrees above the pre-industrial average. With this level of warming, the planet could undergo a series of tipping points, changes so significant that the climate could then spiral out of control.
3 degrees Celsius global warming would mean we're talking about a different planet. It's a planet that hasn't existed for millions of years. There were no humans on the planet when it was 3 degrees warmer. Not only sea level would be different, but climate zones would be shifted. It would be a very different planet.
The last time the planet warmed this much was 55 million years ago. And it went on to rise by 6 degrees. But it warmed at a much slower rate than is occurring now. The effects were catastrophic and included widespread extinctions in the oceans. It took our planet 100,000 years to recover. A rise of 3 degrees is a nightmare scenario for us all. Professor Peter Cox is an associate of Britain's Hadley Centre, one of the world's leading climate modelling groups. Here, underground, there are banks of supercomputers that predict weather, both in the present day and well into the future.
As we push beyond 3 degrees, we're pushing the climate system further and further away from where it normally exists. But there are indications